Okay. So it is recording, right? It's not giving me there we go. Okay. So I spoke quite a lot about the structure of the vertebrae of the spine, the curves, the things like the spinous process, etc. Has anyone got any questions or any input along those lines about the actual structure, facets, anything like that? Any questions, any input? Fire away. Not really. So can we see how all of these structures have an influence on the way we move in the back? Flexion, extension, lateral flexion. I mean, that all makes sense. Is there anything that you want me to recap on the actual structure of the vertebra? Anything that didn't make sense? No. I think, you know, it's pretty straightforward once you understand where the facets are, where the spinous processes are, and then start to sort of put that into movement in the spine and yoga poses. So sometimes we tend to think that, you know, if we keep trying to get into the most perfect wheel, or we keep trying to get into Kapotasana with enough effort and force, you know, we'll get there. So I think it's quite nice to understand the actual structure of the spine, to realize that sometimes it just is structure and we're not going to be able to get past that. So what I spoke about a bit as well was the compressor forces and tension forces. So if it's tension, that soft edge that we come to, that is the soft tissues, the muscles, the ligaments, the tissues, etc. That we can work on. We've got a little bit of give in that. So through time, we'll be able to manipulate that into helping us in our yogic poses. But when it comes to that structure of the bone on bone, spinous processes knocking into each other, facet joints, the orientation of that, that is bone on bone restriction, and that's where it stops. So that's where we need to end. And I found it's taken me quite a long time in my yoga process to figure out the difference between the two. You know, what is it? Is it ligaments and muscle that's holding me back in my extension, or is it actual spinous processes? Is it bone on bone? So it's a very subtle feeling, but the tension's got a little bit of, in soft tissues, it's got a little bit of a give, a little bit of a spongy feeling, but that hard jamming is bone on bone. So I think we just have to be really mindful and aware of that. Yes, Janine.
Claire, I must say, I find it quite difficult. I don't know if anybody else has the same experience. I think because we do push ourselves in yoga, I know where my end range is.
Yes.
But I find it difficult to feel what is end range and what is bone to bone.
Yeah.
Would bone to bone necessarily be pain, or would it just be it's not going any further? There's no more bounce in the muscle.
Yeah. You see that
it's such a difficult.
Yeah, it is. It's a look. You'll also get with the bone on bone compression. You also, just before that or within that, you get, for instance, if you're in an extension, you're going to get a slight pinching of ligaments in between, say, the spinous processes, or the, you know, for instance, in the supraspinous ligament. There's a little bit of pinching in that, and that can translate as a bit of a pinch and as pain. And I think that hard, jarring feeling is just something you need to work with. Like I say, it's a slight sponginess with a ligament or a soft tissue, but a bone. And I've also, like I say, I've struggled to find that point, but it's just, there is a very subtle difference for me where keep pushing and I just can't go any further. It's actually just a stuck jamming feeling.
Okay.
So there would be slight pain with it and a jarring. That's the only way I'll be able to explain that difference. Does anyone else have any experience of that? Are you able to sense the difference between bone on bone or, you know, medium soft compression? No. Yes. Emma.
Hi. Sorry, I'm keeping my mask on because Seriously, COVID is everywhere.
Oh, no, it's so scary.
It's terrible. So I think it's different for everyone, and it depends on if you are injured, you will feel some pain. So there's a difference between like a deep stretch where you'll go into a little bit into ligaments maybe, and when you hit on bone.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's one size fits all here. But there's one thing that I'd like to say about the spine, like your body will always warn you before it actually gets injured. And it will tell you, I can't go further, so don't make me go further. And we tend to want to push it to its limit.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It can translate like that bracing type of a feeling, I think.
Yeah, bracing, but also maybe like, I guess pain, but you know, pain's different. It's the same when I'm teaching a patient to stretch, and you know, like let's imagine a really stiff person trying to get into like runner's lunge or something like that. You know, they're like, oh my gosh, it's going to break. And then you're like, it's not going to break, but come a little bit out of it. And that's the difference between like a deep stretch and I guess, pain. Pain is right before it's going to break.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that you know, you get that sense of, if you're talking about a running lunge or in a pigeon, for me, for instance, if I'm holding it, there's a sense of resistance. And as soon as I consciously make a decision of inhale and just exhale a little bit further, that's the difference. There's a little bit of give in it. So there's a bracing, and when I instruct often with a pigeon or a Baddha Konasana, when there's that conscious holding on, and then when you really just make the decision to let go slightly, everything. So for me, I kind of translate it to a bracing, to a holding, a protective holding, but then there's still a little bit of leeway within that, and then eventually getting to bone on bone. So I think maybe if we do it sort of incrementally and slowly, you know, you'll know when the body's holding on just from a protective point of view before injury, rather than going into full range.
Yeah, but also I like let's say you're practicing a back bend and your back's always niggly in that back bend. Like I'd never promote you push through it, because your back's warning. That's a warning sign.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's when like yoga people, yogis get injured, because it's like a repetitive strain. So yeah, I'd never promote someone to push through a bracing. You know?
Yeah, it's kind of that feeling, you know, when you're lying on your back with Supta Paramkustasana with a strap on your leg and pulling, and suddenly you start to get that sewing machine shake. Your legs, you know, the hamstrings kind of going back. It's like mayday, mayday, kind of back off. It's kind of that kind of bracing feeling, which when I see that happening, I immediately say to people, just relax a little bit, back off a little bit. My feeling is to warn people, well, just let discomfort be your guide. You know, pain is too late. You know, pain, something has happened. Discomfort, you get to your edge of discomfort. We do want to challenge and push ourselves, but going beyond that, I think you're right. We're asking for a problem, an injury. Yeah. Eva.
Yeah, and I have to agree with Emma on that. Like, why even pushing into it? Because what do we get out of it if we push and the body is warning us? Because if we feel like it's a warning, it's like our brain signals us that it's not feeling safe with what we do. And why push it into it instead of what studies have shown, instead of rather working actively in the pose and create the sense of safety? That's what a lot of studies now have shown, that at that active range of motion and working actively at that endpoint where we can actively get to will even increase our range of motion. And step by step, this stopping point, this bracing point will shift. And so I would never encourage people to work into that point, but rather work actively a little bit out of that point to shift and to create a sense of safety for the nervous system to increase the range of motion in the end. Because otherwise, why should I work into it? There's nothing to gain.
Exactly. Yeah, so within that range, gaining the strength, gaining technique. And I also think, you know, but then also realizing that, as we've discussed, there is an eventual end range eventually, you know, structure, bone on bone. Yeah, exactly. It's a really good point. Yeah, good. Any other comments on that? So we spoke also, maybe we can speak a little bit about something that I'm always quite curious about is, we spoke quite a bit about the cervical spine, the makeup of the cervical spine. It's designed for mobility rather than stability, etc. And then comes up the big question of shoulder stand, headstand, plows, etc. So I'd be curious just to ask how many, just raise your hands, how many of you in your own personal practice headstand? One, two, three, four, five. Okay. All right. And for those of you who didn't raise their hand, can you maybe give me your reasons for not practicing headstand? Eva?
Yes, I prefer headless headstand.
Okay.
It's got to do with my cervical spine. I had a whiplash injury a little bit, I think 2 years ago, and since then I always have trouble like getting migraines and whatever whenever even with rabbit pose. So I'm not, if I want to have the same like physiological reactions in my body that I get from a headstand, if I want to do an inversion, I just choose a different one because it's not comfortable for me, and I can just switch to like headless headstand where I also link the hands, and yeah, and I have relatively short upper arms, so I put a lot of weight. If I don't have props and things, then I put a lot of weight on my head in headstand. Anyway, so it's not ideal for me.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Yeah, so you know, we can get the same the benefits, the inversion, you know, the sense of practicing your balance, etc., from a headless headstand. So another kind of inversion. So especially with something, you know, that's what we said. I said it along the line with the headstands, etc. You know, they don't. If we are practicing in the correct way for our body, doesn't. So I practice headstand. I love headstand. Headstand makes me feel. I feel really relaxed in headstand, but I only do it because I know that my shoulders are really strong enough. I've got the right length. My arms are the right length, and when I'm pushing into my forearms and I take my fists together, you could almost slip sort of 2 yoga mats under my head almost. I'm so light on the top of my head. You know, I'm really pushing through. So I know that I'm not putting a lot of load on my cervical spine, and I don't have any issues with my cervical spine. So I would completely agree with Eva. If there's any, you know, it doesn't have to be injurious, but if there are any kind of disc problems, whiplash problems, pain in the neck, it's not a good option. For me, I find it fine. I personally don't like shoulder stand. For me, I don't practice shoulder stand. But we can chat about shoulder stand just now. Who else who doesn't practice headstand would like to? Yeah, Mandana. Why is it?
Yeah, the reason for me as well, I find it very uncomfortable. I tend to put a lot of weight if I do this in my head, and I feel like I'm compressing the neck area. Yeah. But I also was trained with Catherine and you guys on my 200, so I learned that we can do it. We could do a headless handstand. So
yeah, headless headstand. I mean, and we'll get on to that next question. Who else? Who doesn't do headstand? No. Anyone else? No. Okay, and out of the headstand question, how many of you teach headstand? Quite a few, yeah, a few. And would you teach it in a public class? In a big public class? Caro's saying yes. Juliet, yes? Okay, all right. And in that class, in a public class, would you prop when you teach headstand? No. Yeah, Caro?
What do you mean exactly by prop? Like
So,
shoulders on blocks, or like
shoulders
a
on blocks,
headstand
blanket,
chair, or
any type of, chairs, blanket.
a blanket.
Yeah.
You mean blanket under head?
So you either or. So you could put blankets on the heads or blankets on the foot, depending on the arm distance. So you don't cup, you just normally do headstand.
I do normal headstand, like I'm like the supported one with like this, but if I say I'm teaching headstand, I'm not saying everyone is going to be up in headstand, you know. It's some just do like the drawing knees in, or maybe staying there in a tuck, and obviously it depends how each person is feeling. What I don't do is putting a blanket underneath my forearms, because I feel like this takes a lot of stability away and actually has me fall over a lot more easier, because the ground just gets too soft and kind of wobbly.
Good point about popping with blankets. We do need to be careful. You know, we need to use sticky mats and things. I've seen people doing headstands where, you know, you can, roll up your sleeves, sticky mat, just be, and also, it sounds like a small thing, but when I trained in America, they kind of, they had the whip out, because if your blankets, it's very Iyengar based, if your blankets, the edges of your blankets weren't facing forward on the same level, but it does make a difference. You don't want the tassels of the blankets kind of under your arms and your face, wherever you are. So if we are going to be doing that, we need to be very pedantic about how we are propping. So it's interesting to see some of you are very comfortable with headstand, teaching headstand. Janine, you had your hand up as well.
Sorry, I only teach small classes, so I would never teach headless. I only do headless headstands, or with a chair. I've got headstands chairs, which I absolutely love.
Yeah.
I just feel that takes, you get the feeling and the movement of the headstand. You can activate the muscles, but there's completely no weight on your shoulders or your head, which is nice. It's, it just adds a fun element to a class without the danger. I mean, I think, standing on your head is not a good idea. I don't think the cervical spine was made for that at all.
Yeah.
So we do have to be careful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is one of those poses, we talk about not, alignment not being for injury purposes. We mustn't think of alignment and injury related. But I think when it comes to shoulder stand and headstand, for me, there is definitely a certain amount of technique and skill that needs to be taken into account, and strength that needs. So if I teach headstand, it would be probably mostly in a private, with someone that I know, someone I've worked with for quite some time, that I know what their strength is, I know what their capability in terms of balance, alignment, etc. for that. So
and also the fear factor. A lot of people are petrified of just being upside down.
Yeah.
Even if they are supported by a chair, they feel like they're going to fall over.
Yeah. So again, that comes down to progressive skill, progressive loading, progressive training. I've had people come to me specifically and I say, what is your goal? I want to do headstand. Even when I teach yoga to kids, I get the moms to fill out a little form. What are the challenges? Whatever. What are the goals? Headstand. So I think yoga and headstand or shoulder stand are these big kind of poses that everyone wants to get to. And I would be very willing to help someone, be very willing to help someone come into headstand if the capability and over a long period of time, headstand's one of those that people also can come into and have the right technique. The longer you hold it, the tighter you get, and the more you start to collapse and kind of shoulders and you can see it very quickly, So it has to be done very slowly, very incrementally, and it's very different, as we saw in the slides as well. Hand position it's not one size fits all. I've played around with palms together, hands interlaced. It really makes a difference on the loading. We saw that the arm difference makes a very big difference. And where we place the head. So it's all those kind of things that I like to be able to watch very carefully with people and then build them up to it. Yeah, Cara?
I'm just wondering if there's actually like any research on headstand being like dangerous for the majority of people, or like, because I mean, I totally get that you want to prep for it and that you want to teach the technique and everything, but I don't, personally, my opinion, I do not think it is damaging to the spine to stand in headstand for like 5 to 10 breaths, or some people like to hold it longer, but I'm not one of them. But anyways, like, we get taught headstand in school from like a very young age in like the gymnastic parts of our physical education.
Yes.
And we actually get taught the tripod headstand, which is even more pressure on your head.
Talk about tripod, yeah.
Compared to the supported with the forearm headstand. So I was wondering, is it like really this dangerous of a thing, or is this just a situation, once again, where you just have to take the individual into account and then see how everyone's feeling?
That's what I would say. You know, again, you know, Leslie Kaminoff says a pose, you can't talk about a pose without putting the person at the center of the pose. You know, you can't say shoulder stand is a bad pose, or headstand, we shouldn't be doing it. It's very much about looking at what you're working with, looking at the person as a whole, looking at what you've got to work with, shoulders, length of arms, their technique, their balance, their sense of fear, all sorts of things. And I think any pose can be done and doesn't have to be labeled injurious if you are looking at all of those aspects. I mean, there have been one or two, there was a very small research, a survey that was done. There was no control group. I think it was done in Sweden. It was small, without a control group. And what they came up with is saying that between 40 and 48% of your whole body weight is resting on the cervical spine. And they quoted that it puts a minimum of 50% of people at risk for cervical spine injury. But I honestly would take that research with a pinch of salt, because it was so small and there was no control group. You know, they came up with a whole lot of other things as well within that. That was in the slides, just about coming up, what the rate of load on the head, which one was better than, you know, and they came up with the pike was coming up, the least amount of pressure, the best stability. And then they said that the longer the hold is, the more compression, which makes sense. The longer you're holding the pose, the more tired you might get and sort of start sinking into it as well. So, you know, there's been bits and pieces of research, but I would say, once again, it completely depends. I wouldn't rule out a pose completely without looking at the individual and what you have to work with. Yeah, that answer your question. Okay. Tripod handstand, that's also a headstand. That's another one. Who does tripod? Yeah. Karen, why would you choose one over the other? Juliet?
Well, just for like in my personal practice, I just prefer the tripod. I think I get way more stability and it's easier to move around, and I've just always preferred it. Okay. But I'll teach both, but yeah.
It's quite interesting that you say that you get more stability, because traditionally it's kind of been said that it's the other way around, that, you know, that the closed chain of the hands together, the forearms and the pushing down makes you feel a little more stable than just the hands. So that is interesting. You know, the shoulders.
Actually,
who's talking?
Sorry, Claire, the other Claire. Sorry, I thought you'd finish what you were saying.
And also, so what they've been saying is that the closed chain helps you to feel a little bit more stable when the arms are open, a little bit more unstable, but tripod would be better for someone with very tight shoulders. So normal headstand, you've got to get, you know, your shoulder flexion's got to be a lot better than when the shoulders are away from you. So shoulders are a big thing, and then the stability. So that's interesting.
I would actually ask Taryn, so when we were watching the slides, and maybe Claire, then you can confirm this, because I just noticed it in myself. I checked my elbow length, and so I'm one of those people who my arm's longer, so my elbow is higher than my head. So then wouldn't that actually, maybe that's why tripod feels more stable, because in the other one I'm sort of I would need that blanket to get my head onto the floor, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like you were showing in the video. So Taryn, if do you also have longer arms?
Could be.
Yeah, well, I think also I and especially when I started yoga and I first learned how to do headstands, my shoulder flexion was really bad. So I think that could have definitely also been it. And yeah, it just doesn't, I don't know, it just doesn't feel stable to me. But I'll do some measurements and see.
Yeah. So the stability is one thing, the shoulder flexion the other one, and you need, I would say, more arm and shoulder strength for tripod than for forearm. So those would be the difference.
And I've got very strong arms, so that's probably also why I like the tripod.
Yeah, I like tripod as well, I must say. Anyone else, anything to say on headstands? No. And how about shoulder stand? Who teaches shoulder stand?
I hate it.
You hate it.
I hate it so much.
Okay, who's vehemently saying they hate it? Who's that?
It's Claire again. Sorry.
Hello.
I've got neck issues. I had 2 big ear ops, and they did something to my neck, and my neck always does something funny. And shoulder stand, literally, I can hear a sound in my one ear clicking when I do shoulder stand. I'm like, nah, this is not my friend.
That is interesting. Okay. So but it's not a compressive thing that you feel in your neck, or it's just an uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable. I dislike it. Sometimes it's sore. It's weird. Sometimes it's sore. Sometimes it's not, and I can get up there. I feel all lifted, and then I can just hear this like in my neck, and I'm like, you know what? I mean, in my ear. I'm like, you know what? Let's leave this one alone.
Put our legs up on the wall. Yep. Personally, I don't practice shoulder stand. And it's a strange sensation. It's not about my neck and the compression of my neck. It feels more about something in my throat. It feels compressive in my throat, like I can't breathe, like something's sitting on my chest and it's got me in the throat. So, there is that medium or soft compression where, we do have the esophagus and the trachea and things. So there is that compression. And for me, I break out into a fine little sweat at the top of my lip, when you eat chili or something, and I feel like it's strange. And I also find it very testing strength-wise. And I am really strong in shoulders and that, but for some reason, and I think it's because I can't get my hands in the right place. I did Iyengar for a little while as well, and they like you to have your hands sort of in your lower back flat. You're not allowed to hold on to, use your thumbs. And I find that very difficult. So I find it compressive, and I find it hard to hold that position. So I don't practice shoulder stand. Yes, Janine, are you waving or yes?
Sorry, I love shoulder stand. I find it the easiest thing. Okay, I'm now not allowed to do it, sadly. I don't feel any pain. I almost feel like I get a complete release in my cervical spine. So for me, I love it. I could sit in shoulder stand and go back and stay there all day.
And you
I'm
don't
so comfortable.
And do you
no pain whatsoever? No, straight on my mat.
Yeah.
Which I probably shouldn't be doing. Well, I know I'm right now not, but it's the most comfortable pose for me. Yeah. It's nicer than a headstand.
Well, just remember again, it doesn't have to mean that it's because you've got a deep cervical flexion, doesn't mean that it's an injurious pose. It depends on, are your shoulders in the right place? Have you got enough extension to be able to transfer the weight from the trunk into the hands to the top of the shoulders? So we want all that pressure to be in the upper arms, top of the shoulders, not on the neck. And if you're able to get into that position, then, that should be fine. Yeah.
I think it's also, as we've said before, it's different things work for different people. I know Jenny Rowlings has been having a couple of posts lately, and we've been chatting with regard to shoulder stands and how many yoga teachers refuse to teach it and say that it's so unsafe and it's so injurious and they'll never teach it in a class. And I'm like, really? It's like a downward dog for me. It's so bizarre.
I would teach it.
Because it depends on what's happening in your neck.
Yeah, I would never teach it in a busy class where I couldn't prop and I couldn't see exactly what's going on. I would teach prop shoulder stand, and I've only ever taught it, would only ever teach it in privates. I think because again, there's so much to look at. Has the person got the shoulder extension? Have they, what is happening in their neck? if they've got any kind of hyperkyphosis surrounding with the neck forward, that might be a problem again, with the neck being forward and being compressed. You know, for instance, Bernie Clark always says, if you're going to changing the range of motion in a joint with load, you need to be super aware of the sort of the neuromuscular coordination and the pattern of movement. In other words, proper technique. So when you've got a load and you're moving it out of its neutral, so into extension or that, whatever it is, under load, then that's when we need to make sure that we've got the absolute skills to come into that pose. So again, I think it can be done, but I would be cautious. I would also, again, as we spoke about everything, progressive loading. So have someone, could be a fear factor, it could be a strength factor, it could be technique. We'll work on all of those things. Have someone lie with their back to the wall, with their feet on the wall at a little bit of a 90-degree angle. I've seen that done a lot with propping. And then slowly but surely, doing shoulder stand on the chair is amazing as well. You know, feet on the chair, feet on the back of the chair, etc. So definitely ways to get into it. I know when I told the yoga teacher that I was really struggling in shoulder stand with that compressed feeling, I was told that I was holding something emotional, something in my chest, something that I couldn't let go of, something that I couldn't breathe out. So that was interesting. That's another take on it. So I just throw that in. Anyone else who teaches shoulder stand? Yes, Tegan.
So I do teach shoulder stand. I also like it with the pillow, not the pillows, the blankets. I find it very, like way more supportive. I actually struggle. I practice shoulder stand because I struggle with it. So I find like my neck just is so tight that being in this like flat position and then the weight, it just like really, I feel it in my neck, not in a painful way, more like it's just stretching it out. And that stretch goes from my neck to my lower back, but all again, it's like a stretch. But then padding and like blankets really help take it out of my neck because it just lifts the shoulders up. So huge fan of blankets. Also must be folded neatly because you will feel it. And yeah, I don't have a problem with teaching shoulder stand. I used to be afraid of headstand and shoulder stand, and yeah, I just also realized that like this isn't generally that much of a safe practice all the time. So, you know, like I don't teach headstand willy-nilly, and shoulder stand I do think is somewhat okay. And the thing is, when I teach these poses, I should rather speak for myself. When I teach these poses, I always teach with variations. And I always say to people, if you don't want to practice the pose, that's absolutely fine, but this is the variation I'm looking for. So I find like variations help. And if anyone doesn't want to do headstand in my class, I'm like, that's absolutely perfect. Just stay in dolphin. All I'm looking for really is this, the shape. And it doesn't have to be in the perfect headstand, but the main point is we're not doing nothing. So yeah.
Perfect. Offering a modification, it's absolutely 100%. I think understanding, you know, the point I'm also trying to make is that we've had a look at the structure of the cervical spine. We know that we've got a long spinous process on C7, that's the longest, or it might be I think it's 70%. C7 is the longest, in 10%, T1 is the longest, in 20%, C6 is the longest. C6 and C5 are basically where we are taking that most pressure in a shoulder stand. We need to be aware of that, you know, so that is something to caution it. We can't, you know, so we can't just go and say it's injurious, but we also can't just say that everyone, exactly what you just said, Tegan, is that, you know, you're not going to open up to everyone. There needs to be modifications. Yeah. Claire?
I've got a different question that was just occurring to me. So you talk about the intervertebral discs having more fluid in the morning and obviously less in the evening. And if you don't hydrate, I imagine you would have less fluid in those discs. Would the amount of fluid in the discs add to mobility? So I mean, if you go off and you do a back bend in the morning, would that feel easier and more comfortable than if when the fluid had drained out and you had less, I don't know, buffering going on?
So that's an interesting one. I'm trying to think. I think it was David Kill. David Kill said that he is he's taking a stab at it. He said no research that he's read has claimed any of that. But he is saying that exactly that in the morning you wake up and the discs have absorbed nutrients and fluids and have plumped up. So he says, I guess then that any injuries to the spine would happen later on in the day. So he's taking that. He had a stab and a guess at it. Bernie Clark and I think Stuart McGill together, and I think it was probably Stuart McGill who said that, in his opinion, that doing yoga first thing in the morning is probably not the best idea. So, you know, when you get out of bed and you kind of get up and you, you know, and I mean, we're all young and fit and healthy. So it's not like we're old and we're kind of getting out of bed going, oh, it's because I'm old. There's something about getting up in the morning and feeling a little bit like, we just need to kind of stretch out. There's a little bit of a stiffness that we're feeling. And basically he's saying, first thing in the morning, we should be giving ourselves about 30 minutes before we do any kind of get into our yoga practice. Brush your teeth, have your coffee, walk around a little bit. So his theory is that the intervertebral discs plump up, as we say, during the night. Therefore, the spine, inverted commas, is possibly lengthening a bit because of the intervertebral discs getting plumper and lifting. So those ligaments and the soft tissues around the spine are being pulled taut. That makes sense, because things are kind of lengthening out. And that then is creating this kind of stiffness. And he's saying it's probably a better idea to just loosen up. I mean, I'm not saying like an hour and kind of doing stretching exercise, you know, but just allow the body to kind of naturally sink back into a little bit more of neutral than rather extension. So it's a good question. There's some theories out there, but I don't think any research has been done.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I see lots and lots of, I'm just going to have a quick look here, apart from inversions. Okay, so that's another one that comes up. Let's see, apart from this, I'm still practicing inversions. Yeah. Okay. A lot of cues from yoga teachers not to do inversions, headstand, shoulder stand, etc. when you're on your cycle. So that I've also, you know, looked into quite a bit and tried to find some kind of solid research. There seems to be two separate schools of thought. Some say no, and it seems to be linked to the endometriosis. That's the one thing, and the other one is the apana vayu, which is the downward flowing energy. Okay, that is supposed to flow down into reproductive organs and birthing process. That you don't want to. It's a downward flowing action. That energy that you don't want to upset the balance of that. So there's the very physical endometriosis could be affected, and then there's the energy flow side of it. My theory on it is, personally, I would say if a woman feels like she's got enough energy, doesn't feel bloated, doesn't feel whatever the case is, go for it. So that's my opinion. So we get two schools of thought. Some people say it's nonsense. You know, there's not going to be this retro menstruation. You know, it's not going to invert things. It's not going to pull the blood in the wrong way. And then others say, and I think it comes sort of also from way back, that it's not a good thing. So, but I would say if you're feeling up to it, you're feeling strong, you're feeling good, because a lot of women say that it helps. Coming upside down just makes them, energizes them, or they feel really good. So what is everyone else's opinion on that? Janine?
I must say, I agree with you there. My brain says to me that we meant to menstruate. People menstruate and do ballet. They do all sorts of activities every day. So maybe with endometriosis, I mean, I don't have any experience with that, so I can't comment, but yeah, I think menstruation is a normal part of our lives, and our lives carry on regardless in every other way. I don't think doing a headstand or a shoulder stand is going to make
And I think
Much
that's
of a
the point,
difference.
you know, for me, I feel like what I'm going to start my yoga practice or certain things I make for 5 days or 4 days or whatever the case is, you know, no, it's as normal. Yeah, I agree. Tegan.
I agree with you also, and I think like what I think is really important for women who practice yoga is to, like you said, like figure out like how do they feel, you know, like do you want to come to your mat on the first day? Maybe some people do or don't, like depends how bad your period might be or how heavy. So I think like I definitely like to move on my period. The first day, just by nature, I just, for some reason, I don't like doing an inversion on the first day, but after the first day I don't care. But again, it's just like that level of like, you know, a little bit of space. And also I do maybe agree with the energy idea. I know that it's just an energy thing physiologically, like you said, no blood's going up, so I'm not worried about that. But I also like the idea of just a break also for the body, like not constantly, maybe, especially because I do quite a lot of inversions, like not constantly being like, okay, today's a day off, it's fine, you know, like just enjoy the day off.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point about listening to your body, and that's hopefully what we all get out of yoga, you know, being mindful and kind of tapping into how you're feeling, getting that sense of, you know, I say with the pregnancy as well. I think it's a great, Mother Nature's already giving you so many signals and kind of cues as to, oh, you wake up and you feel really nauseous today, well then don't go to yoga, because that, you know, and can I do this and shouldn't I do that? Well, I think that's also, it's such an intense sort of mindful practice for pregnant women, because then you really need to be listening to your body, and then I think that's adding to your experience of yoga, which is what we should all be getting out of yoga. Be mindful, be present, be aware, listen to your body. So I think that I would tend to agree with you. I really, for me, think it's about, and it might change from 1 month to the next. You know, I might feel good on the second day, and on the 4th day I have no energy. It's, you know, very up and down. So I think we need to listen. Yeah. Anyone else got any comments on that? Let's see. I know there seems to be a lot of comments. Let's have a look. So Caro, yeah. Taryn asks, are there cues you guys add for shoulder stand to make it accessible and safe? I think for me, the things there are very much looking at the individual to see where they, you know, I know in the slides it said, we used to, and we don't so much anymore, when standing in Tadasana or lying down, have a look at the curve of the neck. So if you look at someone who's got a very flat neck, then you might deduce from that you need to raise the shoulders and allow the head to be lower than the shoulders. You know, so there's those taking the arms behind you, interlace your hands, lift the hands behind you, and see how far you can go without the chest collapsing and bending over for extension in the shoulders. So I think for me, it's more about, you know, looking at the individual, finding out the structure of the body, and then within that, making sure that tucking the shoulder, you know, getting the shoulders in the right place. So the cues would very much be around being able to get the shoulders in the right place, make sure that the head feels free, make sure that the hands, that you feel that the weight is on the top of the shoulders and the top of the arms, that you're pushing through the arms rather than having all the pressure on the head. I mean, I think those are safe guidelines for that. Let's see. Good air pressure pose, be variation, are there cues you guys have to shoulder stand? Anything else while I have a look through these?
I'm just going to toss in my 2 cents as well when it comes to shoulder stand, even though I said I hate it. Sometimes, especially when you're working with beginners, it's fun to play with halasana against the wall. So you take your feet onto the wall, so you're not taking your feet all the way to the floor, and you're pushing your feet into the wall, which helps you get that nice lower back release as well. And it's nice to play with that. And then also, a lot of people tend to pull or tuck their chin into their chest in shoulder stand, which, you know, brings in that almost cutting off, you can't breathe, you can't function. So a nice cue is to remind people to actually lift the chin up slightly so that they're not crunching into the throat when they're doing that. And obviously trying to lift your bum up higher rather than it leaning towards the floor or backwards towards the floor. I'm trying to describe in my head what I'm thinking, but the higher the bum is, the more comfortable it gets to actually get into that shoulder stand position. So lift, lift, lift. That's my 2 cents.
I agree with you on the plow pose. I enjoy plow, not the shoulder stand. So I often do plow with I think you saw in that picture with the feet on the chair, or the tops of the thighs over on a chair for plow pose. Or you could have a chair or something under your feet or back onto the bed. I think that's a great supported way, you know, and build up with that, possibly use that as building up, or use it as a prep pose for shoulder stand is a good one. Yeah. Emma's saying she finds shoulder stand difficult. Okay, Emma, I definitely don't have that problem. Yeah, and that is a thing. That is a thing. A lot of people have, you know, let's face it, that's, you know, even in, I talk about in twists and talk about pregnant women, and, you know, not only do they have these big bellies, but other things are changing, and it's a physical reality, you know. So a lot of people do have, and I'm still to think of a solution for that. A really, really tight bra, running bra. I don't know. Never experienced that. Yes, who's got their hand up? Emma.
I think shoulder stand can also be quite difficult for people in larger bodies. So I was like, I'm serious about the boobs. It's like a real issue.
Yeah.
You will not find me in shoulder stand for long. Yeah. But I think it's quite hard for people in larger bodies.
It is.
And I think it can be quite, you know, it's hard for someone in a class if you are in a larger body, and, you know, we're getting people into shoulder stand and they can't do it.
No, you're right. The proportions of bodies, you know, because we spoke about arm length, arm width, and growth width comes into a lot of poses in yoga. Shoulder stand's definitely one of them. Twisting as well. Yeah, it's a big thing. Proportions of body.
Emma, can you give me some of those boobs?
Listen, if I could donate, I would, people.
I have zero. Like my pelvis, zero.
Ashton, what have you got to say about that?
No, poor Ashton.
Don't have that.
Also zero for the record.
Okay. Good. All right, and then what about something like, let's think about Ustrasana. So teaching that with the head all the way back, or halfway, or eyes to the horizon. What is the opinion on that? Your own practice and then your teaching. Vidette.
For myself, I've got it to a point where not to go all the way back, but just to have it sort of not straight ahead, but not, I just find horrible crunching in the back of my neck. And it's taken me a while to realize that I don't have to do that I can now sort of come up and it's okay. Yeah. But it's taken lots of practice, especially in Iyengar, having always been also told to like really drop the head back, and it's horrible. I don't like it at all.
So obviously if you're taking the neck halfway, the anterior, the front muscles are going to be really turned on, whereas if you've got the neck all the way back, it's kind of more of a release of the neck muscles. Well, but those muscles are turned on, but
it just feels like a crunching, like a horrible crunching in the upper. But I do battle with my neck quite a bit, so that could be me. But I realize it's awful.
I think that therein lies a big issue. You know, any neck problems or any neck pain, then we shouldn't be. But as David Keel says, you know, we all do sit in such a sort of this flexed position, head forward with texting and computers, and that's the nature of where we're at the moment. It's probably not a bad thing to be taking our head back occasionally.
But that's interesting because so we're coming back to headstand. I mean, again, back to headless headstand. I found no issues, but then there is no weight. It's been taken into the arm, so that's something that doesn't bother me whatsoever. Dropping my head back is a no-go.
Yeah. So he says, you know, taking it back occasionally is probably a good thing, as long as there are no cervical issues, there is no pain. We're not doing it all day, every day. We're not holding for long. So he's saying, but you feel a little bit of a crunch, so, you know, it's not for you. I I think what we have to be aware of in Strasner as well is that the thoracic, as we saw, doesn't have a huge amount of extension for all those reasons that we've looked at. So to get the neck back, so the thoracic isn't going into extension for spinous processes. Some of the rib cage comes into play, etc. So when we pull the neck back, we've got to make sure. So I was reading something quite interesting saying that the T1 vertebra, what we want to do there is try and get that from its position to almost parallel to the floor. So a 90-degree. If we can get that last thoracic, the first thoracic vertebra parallel to the floor, the neck is not going to have to do such a sharp angled bend. So that's interesting, you know, and then there's certain ways to work with that to try and increase that high thoracic flexion by lying over a block and inching it down slowly. There's quite an interesting way to do it. I saw taking a flat block on the mat, sort of across your shoulder blades, and then sitting on another one, lying back straight with the legs straight, taking the arms to the side, tucking the chin, and then allowing the head to come down onto the floor. So you're slightly lifted and then starting very incrementally to take that down. So it starts getting, so it's just, I think a lot with back bends, and you know, sometimes people say, I have a very flat back, how can I get the curve back into my lower back? Well, it poses something like Shalabhasana, but with the right intention, with the right initiation of the pose. Because if you just keep coming back into Shalabhasana, your back's going to default to your thoracic, you're going to get the bend there. But if it's micro, if you're working slowly and intensely right into initiating from the place that you want it to come, and that would be the same for, you know, high thoracic, so working into that to get the head back. And then once that, you know, the thing is, once the neck is back and you've got it in that position, it's kind of the neck is just almost being pulled. It's almost like a sense of traction where the spine is lengthening a bit. But yeah, something to work on. Someone else had their hand up? Yes, Caro?
Yeah, I'm basically with Vidette, totally showing empathy.
Mm-hmm.
That word.
Yeah, got it. Simply.
And it also feels horrible for me to completely drop the neck back, which is more related. I get feelings of anxiety actually coming up when I do so. But the way I would instruct, or the way I instruct Ustrasana is always kind of looking forward, and then once you have reached either with your hands or on shins, or if you with the version with your hands in your waist, depends what you do, then see if you can, if you want to lower the neck, but just basically seeing how that feels for everybody. And I always also instruct to keep to like not let it fall back, but to go only as far back as you can keep control, because I find the most difficult part is actually getting the head back up.
But yeah,
and that feels like super weird and kind of uncomfortable for me to do, at least if I have it drop all the way back, and then it takes so much strain and
interior front,
force for me to actually lift the head back up.
Yeah, so I also feel it the most when I'm coming up. So obviously resisting gravity coming up, the neck muscles are turned on. Yeah, and I think a good way, well, I find an instruction for the Strasana also to get that, if we are wanting that T1 kind of is to lift the sternum, lift from the chest. I think that's rather than just coming back, lift and then back. I find that quite a good cue for that. And then, you know, we discussed the head weighs to almost up to 5 kilos. So there is, you know, we're working against gravity as well there. Okay, anything else on Ustrasana? Shoulder stand, headstand, no. Anything else you would like to discuss on structure or cervical spine or restrictions? Any comments? Nope. Nothing? Is that it? Okay. Are you sure that's it? No more questions?
I might
I
think
have
of
a
one
question.
at like 3 in the morning.
Sorry. Claire?
But I'm not sure whether this is going to get covered later, but I was just, it came up sometime previously, and then looking at the structure of the spine, it made me think about how, you know, a lot of us are trained, you know, you tuck your pelvis under and you're almost trying to flatten the spine. But then when you're looking at the natural curvature of the spine, I don't know, it's making me question whether there's smarts behind that. And I wondered what your thinking is behind that, and yeah, let's see where that goes.
Yeah, well, we will discuss a little bit more, but I think very much about, I would go straight back to the yoga of why are you asking someone to tuck the pelvis? There must be a reason, because the back does have natural curves into it. So why, you know, you would have to ask why you would be giving that instruction. What is your, it's like asking someone in Paschimottanasana to stay upright and keep the spine long. What, you know, there must be a reason. I wouldn't just be tucking every time you're in Tadasana, or if you're in Utkatasana, or whatever the case is, cueing to tuck the pelvis, because that can start to lead to problems if it's constantly tucking.
So is it actually fine for there to be a bit of an arch in that lower back? It's not like you're...
No, absolutely. That's your natural, those are your natural curves. That's the cervical,
Okay.
kyphotic, the lordotic curve of the lumbar needs to be there. When it's not there, there can be, not necessarily, and that's what we'll look at in the back here. You know, people can have a very rounded spine, and some people would look at it and say it's hyperkyphosis. Doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean it's, if it's not painful, it's fine. Might not look great aesthetically, but that curve is supposed to be there, just as, and then there's hyperlordosis, where we get the over-exaggeration of the lower spine. That's also fine, unless there's pain. But the tucking, and if for no specific reason, I mean, I might ask you to be tucking because I want you to round your lumbar spine, tuck the pelvis for some specific reason, that's fine in a class, but I definitely it wouldn't be my default of asking people to tuck. Because, you know, with the natural curves of the spine, the nerves and everything are designed in that way to fit in certain places. And if you start to undo that, then we start looking at imbalances and little neural issues, etc.
That's really interesting, because I've literally been taught and almost been working my butt off trying to get a flat back, if that makes sense, because I keep on getting taught, and my yoga teacher keeps on cueing that you want to get that flattened spine, that's where your spine is most supported and your muscles are nicely holding everything together. So it's really interesting hearing that.
Yeah, no, I definitely just wouldn't be willy-nilly tucking pelvis, definitely not. No. I mean, I'd be interested, so she doesn't qualify it. She just thinks that it should be flat. The lower back should be flat.
Well, I think it's again, I mean, even dealing with my bio, it's old ideas and thinking about having that core work in play, because part of the tucking is getting your tummy working. And I know even while I've been playing with it, you know, even in handstand, she focuses very much on getting that lengthened straight spine, and that's when your spine's stacking properly, and that's a better structure. But again, when we're looking at this, the look of the spine and the natural curvature, actually in handstands, are you really wanting to try and push for that straight back? Because that's almost kicking yourself or forcing your back into a weird position.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yeah. Well, the point is there is something called straight back, which is the flattening of the thoracic. That can cause problems. For instance, I've got flat back on one side of my back because I have scoliosis. So flat back can be a problem. You can have winging. So your scapula kind of sit on the roundness of your thoracic spine. So if that is flat, then you can have that winging. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a problem, only if there's pain, but it's kind of flat back syndrome. And then straight back. and then you get something called flat back, and that's termed, a lot of people would call that a problem. You know, and I don't call it a problem. I think it's a problem if there's pain, but what she's, you know, if she's wanting your back to be, have a flat back in your lower spine, that is something that is flat back syndrome, actually. So no, this should be the natural curves of the back, and that is lordotic lower back. Yeah. Someone else was talking. Who was that? At the same time as Claire, was it Janine? There was somebody else who wanted to say something. Yes, Caro.
I mean, I also put it in the chat, but which fits this thing about flattening the spine. Just an anecdote. I haven't really researched into this or anything, but last year one of my friends at the age of 31 had excruciating back pain and was actually diagnosed with a herniated disc in her lumbar spine. And when they did like x-rays and stuff, they saw that her spine hardly had any curve. So it was almost like a stick. And they said that they saw the reason in her herniated disc in that because there was no springiness, so there was more pressure put on her lower disc, basically.
Yep. Exactly. So the design of the curves of the spine are there for a reason, for shock absorption, for strength, for movement. Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, things like, and we'll probably talk a little bit about it in the back here, but things like fusions, where, especially in the old days when they first started with fusions, they used those Harrington rods, which were metal rods that had absolutely no curves in, and they caused a lot of problems because they took the curves out of the back. So there was compensation in all different places, muscle, you know, changes, fusions and bracing and things have got big impact. So yeah, the flat back is not a, you know, it's not something we're aiming for. And I always tend to think of when I cue things as your natural curves rather than neutral. Somehow for me, neutral tends to feel flat. You know, if someone says, come into neutral, it feels like me, like you'd want a straight line. Whereas natural for me, if you think about the natural curve of the spine, is probably a better cue, I think, for myself. Yeah, Caro.
Just another picture that popped up in my mind. Like I was just thinking of these karate kids who have like a neatly stack of bricks, you know, all on top one another, and then they split them.
Yes.
And then try and do this, I don't know, to a branch of a tree or something like that. So
yeah, exactly. That's a really good analogy. Yeah. So they wouldn't be able to crack a bendy branch as well as something that's straight. Yeah. Exactly. I'm just going to have a quick look at your comments. Actually, headstand. Yeah, pressure. Shoulders being difficult. My boobs. I'll go through. Yes, we spoke about the herniated thing. Good. I think that's it. Anybody else? No. Is that it? No questions. All right, thank you, everybody. We'll pick up again. Think of any of your questions, have a look at the videos and slides, and we'll discuss whatever you want. If you've got any questions in the meantime, you can just DM me. Okay. Thank you, guys. Have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. Bye, everyone.
Bye.